6, Part 1, decided that Joan of Arc was not, she did not hear the voices of the saints, of Michael and Catherine and Margaret, rather of devils, that she was Jean la Pucelle, which is a kind of derogatory term for young girl, but really meaning wench, whore. And Jean la Pucelle decided when she was caught by the English to reclaim herself and to say who she really was. So let's bring it down and we'll summon up the courage of Jean la Pucelle, because witches can be good too. A witch's song. Shall I see you tonight, sister? In magic greet, shall we meet on the hilltop where the two roads meet? There's always something to be. A working class, there's always something to be. They hurt you at home and they hate you at school. They hate you if you're clever, and they despise a fool. Till you're so fucking crazy you can't follow.
Tonight we are honored by the presence of a wonderful actress and singer, Tammy Faye Starlite. She's a former yeshiva girl, satirical Christian evangelist country singer, creator of the CD Used Country Girl, guiding light soap opera actress, comedian, and recently a performance artist, witty raconteur, ace impersonator. Maybe you know her as Nico, Marianne Faithfull, Blondie, beauties and heroines of rock and roll. Tammy has incarnated all of them, accompanied by such luminaries as Steve Earle and Barry Reynolds. Tonight, she's going to be herself.
Whatever that is.
Whatever, we're gonna find out who she is. Okay, Tammy, who are you?
Oh gosh, I have so many names. My birth name is Tamar Deborah Lang. I don't know why my mother chose Tamar. It's not a, we weren't religious, we were Jewish. My mother converted to Judaism.
Well, she was a beauty.
My mother?
No, Tamar.
Oh, Tamar. Yes, there were two. There were two Tamars in the Bible.
Really?
There was
two? I know one.
Yeah, there was the one who was Judah's daughter-in-law, who she had a, I don't know how much you want of the story of Tamar. It's fast. Thomas Mann wrote a beautiful, in Joseph and his brothers, he wrote a beautiful chapter on Tamar, and she had a husband named Er, who was the son of Judah, and God, the Old Testament God, who we all know is very capricious, erred, and he did something wrong, and he died. And she knew that she had to continue the line, so she had to marry the next son of Judah, whose name was Onan, who we know him and what he did. So he, instead of impregnating her, he spilled his seed, hence the verb, or the adjective, whatever it is, onanism, the noun. Yeah, so he died, and then she wanted to marry his third son, and he thought, oh God, Tamar is bad news. I don't want my son to marry her, and I'll say, no, he's too young. And finally, like, all this time passed, and she was like, I have to marry your third son to carry on your line. And he said, well, no, it's still too much. So he went, his wife died, and he went off on a trip, and she dressed up as a prostitute, and he didn't recognize her, and he impregnated her, and instead of taking money, she took his seal, you know, his insignia, and then she went back to the village, and he came back, and he saw that she was pregnant, and they were going to stone her because she was unmarried and pregnant, and she said, well, whoever's seal this is, that's who impregnated me. And Judah said, oh, she's more righteous than I am, because she knew that she had to continue the line. So he said, no, don't stone her. And she ended up being a, you know, ancestor of King David, and then apparently of Jesus.
Oh.
So
whoa.
The other Tamar was the daughter of King David, and she was raped by her brother and lived the rest of her life in solitude and shame. Yeah. So it's kind of, I feel a kind of kinship with both.
Both of them, part heroine,
but
part
exactly. But I was never called Tamar. I was always called Tammy from birth.
Yeah, okay.
So Tammy is my real name. Tammy Faye came when I started doing. I was an actress. Yeah. And I had always acted and sung and written plays for my parents. I grew up in the Upper West Side. And, you know, I'd put on shows, and I'd say, oh, we have another show for you. And their friends would say, oh, great, another show. And, you know, so I rewrote West Side Story.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty. Well, I always thought that when I was a kid, I thought that the ending was very sad. You know, Tony dying and all that, right. And you know, Maria saying, "How many bullets, Chino?" You know, so I thought I would play Tony, and my best friend, who lived a few floors above me, Susanna Green, would play Maria. And I rewrote it so that I would be shot and dead, and she would say, how many bullets, Chino? But then, in order to establish that Tony was alive, my idea was to have Tony, while he's lying there, or while I'm lying there, lift his leg and pee. And I don't know where this came from, and I don't know why. This was not incorporated. I think I must have been 11 or 12. You know, I thought this was ingenious, and I don't know why it wasn't incorporated, and Arthur Lawrence didn't pick it up. Right. But, well, whatever. So I did a lot of theater, and then I got into Tisch School of the Arts. I really don't know how, because I think my audition was terrible, and I hated it. I hated it. It was, they put me in the experimental theater wing, and it was just, you know, there was all, it was so, it was a little, not too experimental, but just too much not focused on acting, because they thought you weren't ready for scripts at this point, and you had to do these things, this thing called contact improvisation that this woman who I think still teaches there taught, and she was the movement teacher, very intimidating and very mean, very pretty, but, you know, I was terrified. And it was where, you know, we would all in the class get together and close our eyes and just kind of grope each other. And, you know, it just gets like, you know, 18-year-old boys, it gets gross, you know? And as a friend of mine recently said, who also remembers that, he said not only 18-year-old boys, but 18-year-old boys in sweatpants. So anyway, I switched to be an English major, and I studied acting. I started studying at HB, and I studied with the brilliant William Hickey, who was phenomenal, and who, you know, came to prominence in Prizzi's honor, you know, with Jack Nicholson and Angelica Houston, and he had just done that, so it was very exciting to have him as a teacher, and he would always talk like this, and he would, you know, some people would do a scene, and he wouldn't say anything for a while, and then he'd say, Marilyn Monroe, and he'd tell some long, involved story that would somehow then end up, you know, he would have the most salient point about the scene through this story. And I remember he had one phrase that I will never forget, and I think about it often, even though it was probably in 84 or 80, no, not 84, 86 maybe. He said, he asked an actor had just done a scene, and he said to the actor, are you telling me to look?
Yeah, look in the camera so you look in the eyeballs of the people watching television.
Oh, okay, I want,
okay.
if they want to.
You're talking to the audience.
Okay, so an actor had just done a scene. William Hickey said, how do you feel? And the guy said, well, to be honest, I didn't really feel comfortable. And William Hickey said, you're comfortable in your coffin. And I thought, that's really the essence of life, isn't it? You know, you're never at a point of comfort, you know, and you're always being driven. And It's that kinetic energy that just...
Did Sarah Bernhardt sleep in her coffin?
She might have. I think she did, and I know that Screaming Jay Hawkins would often come out of his coffin, you know, to perform.
Right.
So, and I was also always into rock and roll, and as a teenager I discovered the Rolling Stones, which was after their peak. I was a teenager in the 80s, but I was obsessed. And then through the Rolling Stones I became obsessed with country music because I wanted to, you know, associate myself with everything that they, all their influences, and they had the blues, the 80s. I was a teenager, yeah.
Right.
So I got into Graham Parsons, and then I got into the Judds, and then I got into all this kind of...
Emmylou Harris?
Emmylou I loved, and especially Loretta Lynn, Patsy Cline, Tammy Wynette, and even the modern country stars of the time, like Winona Judd, who I think has a phenomenal voice, or, you know, later on in the 90s, kind of Patty Loveless, or people like that, Martina McBride, who were just wonderful. And I had studied a lot of acting. I did, from William Hickey, I went to, I did Meisner for 2 years, then I studied with Louise Lasser, and then I studied with Robert Lupone and Bernie Telsey before Bernie became a big casting director. And then I found these two acting teachers, Susan Greenhill and Martin LaPlatney, who just changed my universe and life and way of, they really taught me to really be in the moment and to really feel what's going on in the room and to just incorporate that, you know, so that no performance is breakable in a sense. There's nothing precious. Whatever happens, just incorporate it, which I love to do, because then, you know, nothing can really steer you off track, because there is no, you know, track, or, you know, any mistake is kind of welcome.
Well, how did you develop your routine of going out into the audience?
Oh.
I love that, and extending your hand and dancing with people.
Oh.
It's so nice because there's so much impersonality in concert.
Oh, that's, yeah. I don't know, I think just the key, I think, was to reach people, you know, and just to, you know, I always thought, after doing, I did soaps for a while, I did Guiding Light, I did theater, and then I decided to not, you know, just because I did a lot of performance comedy in the 90s, like at Surf Reality and Luna Lounge and places like that, where, you know, people like Mark Maron and Janine Garofalo were part of it, Jim Gaffigan, great comedians, Jeffrey Ross, Sarah Silverman, and everybody was doing other people were doing multiple characters, and I was too. And then I thought, no, I want to just do one. So I picked this character that I named Tammy Faye Starlite, because Tammy Faye Baker was in the news at that time, and the Republicans. It was '94, I remember, and it was kind of that time of the white supremacy. And Ruby Ridge and all that, you know, David Koresh and the Turner Diaries and all that, you know, oh, good times. Yeah. And we're back there now. And so,
you were in New Orleans?
No, I was here, and I started to do this character, and I created her as an evangelical country singer, and I thought, well, if I'm going to be a country singer, I want to be as good as I can. So I studied and I listened and I read a million country biographies and autobiographies, Barbara Mandrell, Naomi Judd, Tanya Tucker, George Jones, Loretta Lynn, you know, Tammy Wynette, and they're fascinating. The autobiographies, especially for what they don't say, which is genius, because I wanted to be the photo negative of a country singer. You know, all the, you know, the internal turmoil that they all seem to have, and the sex and the drugs, but right out in front. And I just, because I have a naturally filthy bent, I'd say subversive, but it's really just attention grabbing. I started writing songs like God Has Lodged a Tenant in My Uterus, and Did I shave my vagina for this, and If You're Coming Down, Sweet Jesus, Won't You Come All Over Me. And then I recorded my first, it was a little CD, an EP sort of, that was called On My Knees, which was a title that was given to me by the producer Eric Roscoe Amble, who's wonderful. And it sort of took off in a weird way, in an underground way. And I started playing in Nashville, and people were saying, you can't go to Nashville, they'll hate you. And I thought, no, I feel that these are my people. I don't know why, but I feel it. And I started going there, and they liked it. And
is that how you met Steve Earle?
Yeah, well, actually, I met Steve Earle through Eric Roscoe Amble, because it's a weird way of meeting him. I was obsessed with Steve Earle because I just loved his music, and I loved especially his comeback after jail, which he's very open about, and when he kind of got clean, so to speak. And I just went to all his concerts and was dancing. I was the crazy girl who was dancing. And then I started working with a bass player who was, I needed a bass player because I was starting a band. And I decided to call Steve Earle's bass player because somebody had told me that they knew him and that he lived in New York. So just because I have no shame, I just called. I don't know this person. He called me back and said, I can't do it, but I have a friend who can. So through this friend, he started playing with me, and Eric Amble also knew Steve, and through them I got to meet Steve, and he said, oh, you're the crazy girl who dances at the shows, and you know, and then I did a show in Nashville some years later where he was there and he loved it, and you know, he took me to lunch the next day and was really complimentary and sweet, and he's been so kind and generous, you know, throughout these years of, you know, it's amazing when you get to meet and also play with the people that you admire, yeah. You know.
Yeah. Dream come true.
It indeed, like, you know, Deborah Harry, I've always, since I was, when I first heard One Way or Another on the Mike Douglas show, it changed my life. You know, I was a Billy Joel fan, and all of a sudden I was not. Then, you know, I was a Blondie aficionado, and through studying with voice with Barbara Mayer, Gustern, who's wonderful, Debbie also studied with her, and I met Deborah Harry there. I was like in her voice lesson, and I thought, oh my God. And then she agreed to sing with me at Joe's Pub as Tammy Faye. You know, we did You Ain't Woman Enough to Take My Man, and it's been, you know, and meeting Penny Arcade. Penny changed my life, you know. When I was doing the Nico show, and I'd been doing that since that, after Tammy, I did Tammy Faye for a long time, and I thought there's only so many, you know, happy incest songs you can have, and there's only so much racism and anti-Semitism I can give out, you know, with joy, because that was Tammy Faye. I thought I wanted to do a show about Nico, who I'd always loved and whose album is so beautiful, you know.
Let me focus on that.
I'll bring Nico.
Hold it up. Right.
Nico, somebody who I also discovered through reading the book Edie when I was 17, and yeah, and I got into the Velvet Underground. I was fascinated by Nico's voice, and then I started getting her solo records, because I found this at Tower Records when there were still, back in the day when there were still record stores and you could go out and buy a cassette, and there are these little things that you could just put into a player and play, and it was one of those bootleg cassettes, and it had her singing Heroes, and she sang, I wish I could swim like the dolphins, and I thought, the dolphins, I love her already, so I just became obsessed with her and started imitating her, you know, and then I decided to write a show based on this interview that she did in 1986 in Melbourne, and I thought this interview was talking about all the songs that I'd want to do, and I got a friend of mine who I'd worked with as Tammy Faye, a guy named Jeff Ward, to play the interviewer, the Australian interviewer. And we had a director, Michael Shirelli, who was wonderful. And we did the show at Joe's Pub, and it was so hugely received. And that's how I got to meet Danny Fields through my publicist, Bob Merlis, who I begged to work on the show. And now he's, I don't know if he's, you know, 5 years later, if he's regretting it or not, but he's been, without Bob Merlis, I don't know what I'd do. So I did this show for a long time. We got wonderful reviews from David Frick of Rolling Stone and Robert Christgau in the Huffington Post, and I did it in Los Angeles and Palm Springs and here. And then I really wanted it to be at the public, you know, or at least under the Radar Festival. So I asked someone high up in the public to come see it. I was doing it at the cutting room, and he suggested I change it and use this other director. And he said that's the way you'll get into Under the Radar.
Are you still doing the show?
No. Well, what happened was I did it with the other director, and I hated it. And other people who hadn't seen the original version with the interviewer was on stage interviewing me. This director took the interviewer off stage, and I was all of a sudden talking to some disembodied voice, and I thought to myself, who am I talking to? And I thought, it's all right, Nico doesn't know. So the people who hadn't seen it liked it. The people who had seen it in its previous incarnation, like Penny Arcade and Danny Fields, read me the riot act and said, this sucked, and you have to go back to the original way. And I was lost, and and they were right, and I was grateful to them. And I went to, it was January of, I guess, last year, or maybe 2 years ago. I didn't know what to do. I had just done this show. I didn't like it. The public theater guy said, well, we don't have money to put it in Under the Radar anyway. And I thought, okay, I just alienated my original director and original actor. And so my accountant, of all people, who's terrific, said, who do you admire that you could talk to about what to do next, you know, for your career? And I thought, I admire Penny Arcade. She's somebody whose career I revere because she is stuck to her guns. She's so brilliant. She's so outspoken. She doesn't compromise, and that's what I want, you know. So I went to Penny, and she said, why'd you come here? And I said, Penny, I need help. She said, you have to do the Nico show in a theater the original way. Get your old director back. Get your old actor back. Meanwhile, I had also been on Marianne Faithfull show to do the album Broken English. Oh yes, which was suggested by a musician friend, Kevin Salem, who knew Marianne, and we ended up doing it at Lincoln Center because I bugged Bill Bragan, who was, you know, booking their Thursday nights at the time, and I just bugged him until he, you know, until he caved. And then we did it at Joe's Pub, and it was, but so Penny got me a run at this past September of 2014 at Theater for the New City, and she said, you have to get Charles Isherwood in to see it, and my publicist went all out to get Charles Isherwood of the New York Times in to see it, and you know, we did the opening night, and he was there, and it was one of those magical, wonderful nights, you know. And then the next few nights we didn't have any. I was sick to my stomach, and we were playing for 11 people, and I said to the band, and I said, look, it's a crapshoot. If we get a good review, great. If we don't, we lose, and we end up. So that Monday morning, actually online, it was Sunday night, the review came out, and it was wonderful, and it was one of those moments where I just thought, oh my God, I've waited so long. I'm not getting younger, you know. So it was such, you know, it's something for which I can't thank Penny Arcade enough, and it helped in terms of people perceiving you in a different way. But then, of course, you're back to square one, and I started redeveloping the Marianne show. We tried to get the Nico show somewhere else. So far, it hasn't, but I still love it, and I think I might do something in October with Nico based. But the Marianne thing has been, and through Kevin Salem, he knows Barry Reynolds, longtime guitar player, co-writer, and I had loved his playing ever since I heard it on Broken English and on subsequent records, and I'd seen him play with her, and I'd seen him play solo, and I think I badgered him on Facebook and said, do you want to come play with us? And he couldn't until we did it at the Metropolitan Room where you saw it, and it was just a dream. I thought, oh my God, I'm playing here with Barry Reynolds and Kevin, and it was wonderful. And
the audience was ecstatic. They couldn't believe it.
Yeah, they really, it was really so
magical.
It was magical, and we'd done the show before without Barry, but with Barry there, just gave it that extra. And you know, I'd also had cover bands, a Blondie tribute band, just because I loved Blondie and I loved Deborah Harry, and a Rolling Stone band, and my husband Keith Hartel, who's a brilliant musician, has played with me in many of these bands. And so it's just, I think, to impersonate them, or you know, try and get their essence, there has to be something you connect with automatically, because I'm nowhere near, I don't look like Nico, I don't look like Marianne, but there's something in them that it's basically, I just want to be them. Well, like when I was little, I wanted to be Farrah Fawcett, you know, so even though I was small and skinny with stringy brown hair and glasses and braces, I had my hair blown out and I thought I look like Farrah. So, you know, I just was like, you know, so it was at 15, I think, that, you know, you had that
the ugly duckling complex.
You know, it was 15 years old, I think it was, when I got rid of the glasses. I got contacts. I bleached my hair, and I was like, whoa, now I can wear candies and Sassoon jeans, and you know. So there you go. But I've been, you know, you always get down. Not always, but I mean, sometimes as a performer you can get, oh, I don't have what so-and-so has, or I want what this person has, but I have to remind myself how lucky I am. And I am very lucky in many ways to have
a beautiful singing voice.
Oh, you're so sweet.
Everybody loves.
Oh God, you are.
Sense of humor.
Oh, you're so.
Honesty,
no, you're just kind, and I'm lucky to have my husband, and.
Yeah, you're lucky to have your husband.
You kind of freaked me out a little. Not freaked me out in a bad way, but in like, how does she know? Because you.
The internet.
Well, it's funny because you said on. I think I was in a petulant mood and I posted something on Facebook or something like that, and you know, in one of those PMS moods or something where you post something, I hate life or whatever, I don't know. And you said no. You wrote in a post, you have to be the only member, your family has to be represented. You have to represent your family. And I didn't know how you would know, or maybe you didn't, that, you know, I'd lost my father in '87, I lost my mother in 2009, and I lost my brother last year. And I didn't